This video was made possible by my diamond level patron Daniel Shillito. You can commission your own review right now over on my Patreon page. When it comes to retro science fiction, few single names stand out as much as Gerry Anderson. Even if you don't know the name, everyone knows at least one of his creations. Stingray, Thunderbirds, Space 1999, Terrorhawks, all these classic shows came from the same creative brain. But there's one a lot of people tend to forget about: Captain Scarlet and the Mysterons, the show that followed the surprise cancellation of the incredibly popular Thunderbirds. Captain Scarlet was created with a sole purpose in mind: break into the American market. It was able to become a significant success with its story about an interplanetary war between Earth and Mars, but it was always a controversial show for its violent, dark nature and has had a lasting mixed critical reception. I personally remember loving it when I was a kid. So all these years later, does Captain Scarlet hold up? Or does it just prove that nothing could ever recapture the magic of Thunderbirds? Let's begin by talking about the two most important aspects of Captain Scarlet and the Mysterons. Captain Scarlet and the Mysterons. The Mysterons are aliens able to perfectly replicate any object, including people. It's basically Amogus. They even have the colours, with Captain Black the imposter because he's the ultimate sussy backer. He's under mind control for attacking the Mysteron city on Mars, which creates an interesting wrinkle in the story, because the humans were the ones who started this whole war in the first place. I just think that's a nice touch, because it doesn't make everything so black and white, for lack of a better word. Since the Mysterons are invisible, it's kind of necessary to have a main personification of this threat, and Captain Black serves this purpose, orchestrating events on a ground level with his gaunt and ghoulish face, allowing you to put a face to the villains, who only ever show up as sinister green circles. I would have liked to see Captain Black go on some kind of redemption arc and rejoin the forces of good, but sadly he never gets a payoff in the original iteration of the show. In a way, the Mysterons are kind of ahead of their time. A lot of people have drawn parallels between the Mysterons and the tactics of modern terrorism, along with comparing the threat to the fears of Soviets during the Cold War, so there is a lot of depth to be found within them. However, the presentation is probably the best thing about the Mysterons, because their actual writing really isn't that great. They're way too overpowered with this ability to be anywhere or anything, so the show has to dumb them down constantly, beginning with the initial promise to enact slow revenge and continuing throughout as they still make all these elaborate, easily foiled plans. I mean, in Crater 101, the protagonists just walk into a Mysteron base and take out the power crystal. That's it. Every episode begins with the Mysteron expositing this week's plan, which is kind of ridiculous. Their omnipresence makes you wonder how they could ever be beaten, a question still unanswered to this day due to both iterations of the show getting cancelled. Instead, it just kind of trades victory, so nobody comes out looking very good. Sometimes Spectrum will stop the Mysteron plot, sometimes they'll fail despite coming close to saving the day. It creates an interesting, realistic sense of Pyrrhic victory because the protagonists can't always win, but it also results in some pretty disappointing back and forth storytelling. The other main element of the show is the titular Captain Scarlet. I really like the premise behind this character. The real man is killed in the first episode, replaced by Mysteron imposter, so he's actually the first villain in the show. However, due to some freak accident, he survives death and shakes off the Mysteron control, returning to the side of the good guys, complete with the powers of being able to sense the Mysterons, whilst also being virtually indestructible. It's an interesting backstory for the main character, giving him enough characterization to be worthy of being the face of the show, even if he doesn't really have enough of a proper identity to stand out from the rest. But we'll get to that in a bit. The main issue with Captain Scarlet's indestructible nature is that it creates the potential of him becoming a Mary Sue. I mean, he can't die, so there isn't much consequence for him personally. They literally fling him about and constantly kill him during the climax of most episodes. A contemporary comparison I could relate this to is Captain Jack Harkness, who is similarly impossible to kill. However, instead of having him constantly die and resurrect, they use it sparingly, so it doesn't feel unproductive like it often does with Captain Scarlet. But hey, at least the end credits are a bop, with the bizarre choice of showing a slideshow of the literal main character dying in different, graphic ways. The poor guy can't catch a break. In terms of the main characters, we have Colonel White, Lieutenant Green, Captain Blue, Captain Scarlet, and our hero, Captain Brown, taking the lead of an assignment for the very first time. We have Colonel White, Lieutenant Green, Captain Blue, and our hero, Captain Scarlet. Together they form the Mighty Morphin Power Rangers. Together they form Spectrum, the ultimate task force to keep peace throughout the Earth, which is a utopian futuristic society. This is a common technique for shows like this. Obviously there are comparisons to International Rescue, but procedural dramas always have some form of central headquarters or a team, because it provides a specific cast and base episodes can continually revisit and explore, almost anchoring the show to the world it takes place in. I like how Spectrum is presented. They're a very flashy organisation with their cloud base and high-tech vehicles, so you can see how efficient and equipped they are. They're a bit over the top with their tanks disguised within lorries and fuel trucks, but it adds a certain James Bond feeling to our operations, so it's quite a nice vibe. They also have their own catchphrase, Spectrum is green, shortened to SIG like Thunderbirds has FAB. But that show is for babies, not cool men who fuck. Yes, Captain Scarlet is meant to be an edgier show compared to Thunderbirds. In the second episode, the Mysterons straight up destroy an entire plane full of civilians without any survivors. So it's a show that doesn't really pull its punches, and I appreciate that. It goes for a more serious approach of its interplanetary conflict, emphasising the action more than developing characters. This is both a blessing and a curse. The animation of the set pieces is really impressive, plenty of destruction across the board. It's a nice show to look at, the character models reminding me of action figures, as if all these scenarios are the kind of things you'd come up with as a kid playing with your toys. However, the focus on action over characters means everything is very simplistic and basic. The characters are just kind of there and don't really stand out, pretty much relying on their different coloured uniforms to give them any kind of identity. It's cool to see a diverse cast of characters in the time period the show was created, but the show just doesn't really have any punch when it comes to characterization. There's not much charm to it, and there isn't really any humour or lightheartedness going on, an issue pointed out by Sylvia Anderson herself, claiming it was too mechanical and needed humanising. It goes to show how important characters are to these kind of ensemble pieces of media. You can have the flashiest production design and the best action set pieces, but if the characters aren't given any personalities or depth, you can't truly enjoy it. One of the biggest issues with the depth and character writing is the episode length. Unlike Thunderbirds, which had 50-minute episodes, Captain Scarlet only has 25 minutes to tell each story. It's not serialised like Doctor Who, so all these 25-minute episodes are essentially standalone without most storylines carrying over. This makes every episode quite predictable. Mysterons make a plan, Spectrum counter it, episode ends. There isn't much meat to it, no subplots or significant character arcs. This would be fine if there was humour sprinkled in, but there isn't, so everything just feels undercooked, without there being any time to flesh anything out. It's a shame because there's so much potential with the series. B-plots and character dynamics are vital for TV shows, so Captain Scarlet is massively let down by this. When Spectrum agents get paired up, it always feels the same. They don't have different styles or approaches making for interesting combinations, and there isn't room for interesting twists within the narratives, so the whole show just feels like it comes at face value without much else going on. However, even though most of the episodes don't carry over, there are still one or two ongoing plot threads and episodes that do connect. Probably the most prominent of these is the Moon trilogy, focusing around, well, the moon. These 3 episodes are the closest the show gets to serialised storytelling, even if Lunarville 7 is classed as the 15th episode, whilst Crater 101 and Dangerous Rendezvous are 21 and 22 respectively, so they don't actually all directly follow on from each other. Lunarville 7 sees the protagonist travel to the moon to find out how the lunar controller has been able to broker a peace with the Mysterons, which is an interesting premise. The moon is completely independent of the war, not considering it their fight. It's a good way to set up factions and give the moon sovereignty. The moon colony doesn't really have the right to declare sudden political independence like Mexit, so introduces some intriguing political nuances that don't go anywhere because the lunar controller is PA Orson and Mysteron agents facilitating the building of a Mysteron base on the far side of the moon. It's so boring. The scheming and plotting of these 2 characters would feel a lot more tense and interesting if it came from a genuine political ambition, but instead it's just the evil monsters puppeting the whole thing all along. It's predictable and bland, but I do appreciate that there's at least a follow-up to the existence of the Mysteron complex on the moon. Indeed, Spectrum now have to destroy the Mysteron base within the crater. It's a very big and risky operation, so the stakes feel high, since it builds upon that previous storyline. The protagonists are essentially going into the heart of enemy territory without knowing what they're up against or what they're going to find, so it feels suitably climactic. They struggle to even get there in the first place, so it feels like a big assault with a lot going on. If you swap the moon for Mars, this could be the final assault on the Mysterons. It feels that epic and high stakes, since they have to try and beat the countdown of an atomic bomb being manipulated by the villains. The Mysteron base itself looks great, full of ethereal lighting and colours, which makes it look perfectly alien. However, much like the ending of Lunarville 7, the ending of Crater 101 just makes the interesting stuff fizzle out. Captain Scarlet can't die, so there's no longer any tension as he stays behind to remove the power crystal. It would have been a lot more tense if the episode ended with a big cliffhanger threatening all the protagonists, rather than the one who can't even die. The conflict is introduced and immediately resolved without much atmosphere or drama. You just sit there like, wait, that was it? It's not really the second part in a 3-part story because the episodes are so loosely connected, so they aren't given much of an effective through line. The loose trilogy is capped off by Dangerous Rendezvous, where the power crystal is being examined to allow Spectrum to contact the Mysterons in the hopes of ending the war. This is good potential, given the protagonist's forward movement in the same way as the Mysteron detector or the Mysteron gun. The whole communication scenario creates a big dilemma, since Colonel White knows it's likely a trap, but they just have to take that risk in the slim hopes of a ceasefire. It's good for showing wartime tensions and how the Mysterons have all the leverage in negotiations. But again, all the nuance is removed because the whole thing turned out to be a trap to destroy a cloud base, showing how predictable the show can be. It's a disappointing end to the loose trilogy because nothing changes. The moon stuff was interesting and looked great, but the protagonists end the arc no closer to ending the war or even simply developing more tech. It shows how the lack of serialization hampers the show, actively holding it back from telling satisfying wider stories progressing the war, since almost everything just reverts back to how it was before, which gets very annoying and repetitive. Probably the biggest offender of episodes going nowhere is the pseudo-finale attack on Cloud Base. This episode sees the worst possible scenario unfold, the Mysterons finally launching a full-blown assault on Spectrum headquarters, crippling the organisation by picking off important agents one by one. There's rare character drama as Colonel White has to try and organise defences against the impending threat. He has no idea what to expect or when the attack will come, so there's some tension within the episode. It's a very brutal story, killing off pretty much all the major characters, including Captain Scarlet himself, which reflects the high stakes and hopeless tone of the episode. It really shows the futility of the human fight back, proving that there's literally nothing they can do. Once the Mysteron force attacks, that's it, there's no way to fight back because the villains are so powerful and really were just toying with the humans this whole time. It's a depressing finale, fitting for the dark tone of the show. Honestly, it's a brilliant episode delivering gut punch after gut punch, which is why the ending is so insulting. It literally, unironically pulls, and it was all a dream ending. No, I'm not kidding. Every part of the episode turns out to be a fever dream Symphony Angel had while stranded in the desert. It's just so awful. It's made even worse considering Gerry Anderson went into the production of Captain Scarlet expecting it to only last one series. So they could have just ended it right here because they knew they wouldn't get any more. Having Spectrum destroyed is basically the only suitable way to end the show. So it feels really annoying that they try to have that whilst also keeping it open-ended. It feels unsatisfying and a waste of such a perfect and suitable ending. It left a bad taste in my mouth because it just made me think, what was the point? The works of Gerry Anderson are not for everyone. His trademark style of supermarionation is incredibly impressive for the time period, but it's easy to see how dated some aspects have become. It's also easy to see how Captain Scarlet was unable to achieve the same kind of success as the wildly popular Thunderbirds. Parents didn't want their children watching the darker show, and from a critical perspective, the shorter episodes and stiff puppets made it hard to get invested in the characters. However, even with these drawbacks, there's a lot to love about Captain Scarlet. The action is wonderfully animated with some brilliant effects and great model work. The world building is vast and interesting, Spectrum emblematic of the utopian future society the show takes place in. It broke boundaries with its diverse cast of characters, and there's plenty of political commentary about the Cold War and real issues of the time. The Mysterons are a clever monster to play upon those fears of communist infiltration, and their endless reach and powers make them a truly dangerous threat. Honestly, the main issue of Captain Scarlet is the format. Every episode being standalone means there simply isn't enough time to tell gratifying stories. Everything is squashed into 25 minutes without any room to breathe. There aren't any B-plots and things don't really change throughout the course of the show. You don't get any character development, so it feels repetitive and predictable, especially because the main character literally cannot die. Overall, Captain Scarlet is a decent show. There's a lot of retro charm to it and there are some genuinely compelling moments and exciting sequences. It's a shame how it fizzled out without definitive end, but in terms of classic sci-fi shows, it's definitely worth watching at the very least. And I'll see you in the next video. And I'd like to give an extra special thank you to my diamond level patron, Fallon Cortez. and all my gold level patrons: Alex Marston, Basil Disco PhD, Calvin, Daniel Shillito, Francois aka Line Vortex, George, Sion Wagner, and Stefan Never Miller.